Yeah. All right. So how was that lunch? I think the potluck idea is really good. No other way are you going to get 45 completely separate dishes, you know? I mean, that's a great plan to have the potluck. Okay, any maybe I shouldn't even open this can of worms. I was going to say, any questions that came up during the lunch break? As you were mulling over, one of my friends, he's a teacher from Australia, and he and I used to teach together in India. We had a big retreat center, and we'd have courses happening simultaneously. His name's Glenn Svensson. Some of you may know him. He's Australian, and so we'd check in with each other during the break. And I remember one lunch break, he goes, "So how's your class going?" And I said, "Yeah, it's good." He goes, "What are you talking about today?" And I said, "Karma." And he goes, "Oh, Karma, it's a hot topic," since he in his Australian accent. I was like, that's for sure. Gets people going. So any lingering, leftover questions from the morning session? Yeah, Chris.
I had this question for a while, see if I can vocalize it. So karma exists in my actions, results, different things. Oftentimes I'll work out of fear of not creating bad karma. Seems to me like the wrong view. And so if I'm not working out of fear of creating bad karma, what is it? Compassion for myself? Is that why I'm feeling?
Yeah. And I think we can get into this place of being almost kind of like completely paranoid about anything that we do, and we're sort of frozen, and then we're almost second guessing our intention for everything we do, and that's miserable, right? Like, it's really hard. I think, we really say that one of the ways that we can guard ourselves is through heedfulness of our actions, but in a way of mindfulness and heedfulness, not so much paranoia. Like, it's kind of really qualitatively different of like, yeah, be mindful, realize you're going to mess up. It's sort of like the flip chart, the first flip chart page when I was talking last night about like, dissing people behind their back and trying to correct myself for it. I mean, there's a progression. It's like, you keep doing the same non-virtue. Maybe you try and apply an antidote immediately after, but you still keep doing it and you regret. And then it's sort of like, over time, you start to break the habits to the point where maybe you'll still think about saying that thing behind the person's back, but at least you won't say it. So that's progress. And then it becomes, then you even start thinking about nicer things to say about the person than the bad things. And we just have to realize that it's a progression and it's a process, and we can't like suddenly be perfect overnight, and nobody's expecting that. And so there's a level of kind of self-compassion of like, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to try and be mindful, I know I'm going to mess up. Cool, I have purification practices when I do, and just do my best without being kind of frozen and setting the bar so high that you expect yourself to be perfect right off the bat. Because if it were that easy, if all we needed to do was know about, the 6 perfections and know about compassion and know about Buddhahood, and we were automatically there, we wouldn't call it the path, right? So I think part of sort of self-compassion, it's not like you get complacent, you go, oh, well, I had this friend in a job once, not a Buddhist at all, and he would do these things, and I'd be like, dude, what are you doing? Oh, well, I'm just an asshole. You just have to accept it. I'd be like, no, it's not good enough. So it's not that extreme of just going, I'm a deluded sentient being. Like, what do you expect? I'm just going to be a jerk. Or like being so hard on ourselves that we just make ourselves miserable, and then we're so terrified of any non-virtue. I mean, that's the beauty of purification practice, because we know we will, and realize like, over time, I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says this, and it's so beautiful. He says, we need this balance. He goes, a lot of people make mistakes in expecting the results to happen so quickly, and then they get discouraged. He said, we've got to really think, and like I said before, mostly we don't, unless we grew up with an idea of future lives. we mostly really only think about this life. And he said, you really have to think your spiritual progress is really over many lifetimes. Like you just need to kind of get used to that perspective of things. And he says, when we look at our spiritual progress, we should see change. He said both things. Like you should really have the long-term view that doesn't get discouraged when you don't see these massive changes in the short term. And he goes, you should look back if you've been on the path for a while, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. He goes, you should look back and go, yeah, I'm getting kinder and more patient. And yeah, things are changing. And he said, if you don't notice that, then you need to adjust your practice. Something isn't working. And so it's this interesting, like long-term, short-term, holding the balance. Like I find I get the most discouraged when, and I'm always comparing myself to like my heroes, the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa. Then I'm like, oh no, God. Lama Zopa doesn't even sleep. Like he doesn't even lie down flat. And I'm like totally in my PJs under the flannel sheets for, 8 hours, no sweat, and I'm like, how can he, well, he's there and I'm here and it's all right, and I'm, aspiring to be the kind of person. But when I get discouraged that way, I have to think of myself and go, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, yeah, I've really changed, I really am more patient and kind and spacious. And so give yourself credit for the changes you've made and realize it's really a process. I don't know if that was a very long-winded answer to the question. Is that okay? Great. Yeah.
Related to that, you just said that it takes lifetimes.
Yeah.
About the spiritual practice. Last night, you really got me thinking about okay, what did it take for
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
life here? And so it probably took a lot more than what I'm doing now. A lot more, right? As far as
Yeah.
spiritual
Yeah.
practice. And so won't I be going backwards if I can't even meet that?
Well,
That's my fear.
so it's said in the Lam-Rim text in the Stages of the Path that to get a precious human rebirth with all of the qualities of that, which all of us in this room have, I don't need to interview you one by one, like for sure we've got it, right? Takes pure morality, like really keeping ethics, practice of the 6 perfections, especially generosity, and then pure prayers to actually have a precious human rebirth. So, as one of my friends who teaches says, a holy being on their deathbed prayed to be you and dedicated all their merit that they accumulated to be you. Some past life being did that, because those are the causes of a precious human rebirth. I mean, I look at my life and I kind of feel like there's nothing I actually did in this life to create the cause to be Buddhist nun, student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who teases me for being tall, student of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I mean, when I got ordained, he was like, what country do you come from? Like, where did they, Nothing I did. In fact, I'm just trying to make up for the first 35 years of my life, which were not exemplary on any, we won't go into details. I don't want to freak you out too much. So I think, okay, some past life created the cause for this amazing opportunity that I have. And wow, I also have a lot of opportunity to charge up that karmic debit card. Like I'm living on the debit card of some past life being that I sort of squandered for a lot of time in the beginning, and now I have the perfect opportunity. So don't get, again, it's sort of like Chris's question, if we get too panic-stricken about it, then we'll just get paralyzed and discouraged and be like, oh my God, there's nothing I can do. Slowly, we take on more practice. I find that one time I was talking to Lama Zopa on the phone. I used to be the co-director of the FPMT International Office, which is like the headquarters of all the centers, and so I had a lot of contact with Lama Zopa. And once I was talking to him on the phone, and I was doing my kind of pathetic apologizing thing that you do when you talk to Lama Zopa of like, I'm sorry, I'm such, so inadequate to serve you, Rinpoche, sorry, that I would do periodically just to, sort of put it out there. And then like, sorry, I'm such a loser and I'm the one working for you. And I remember on the phone, he said, he goes, but your capacity is increasing all the time. And that was like 20 years ago, and I've never forgotten it because after I hung up the phone, I go, wow, he's really right. Like, I remember what I used to be able to do in like, would completely max me out. Like when I first started working for Dharma centers, like the most horrible, awful, really bad day, and what would, be one of those days. And then I'd look back and I'd be like, that's like an easy morning now. Like, you really do realize that kind of as the bar keeps raising, your capacity just keeps increasing. And by the way, that's all the way to Buddhahood, one little increment at a time. It's sort of like you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and then your comfort zone sort of expands to encompass what you're doing. And then you push yourself one more little increment, and then it expands. And then the last little expansion of your capacity is Buddhahood. And that's how it happens. It isn't these huge, it's just that. And so I think it's that. So it's sort of like just kind of carrying on, pushing outside of the comfort zone without panicking and freaking out and going, oh my God, and really realizing that karma increases and trying to really turn as many of our thoughts to virtue as possible and retrain as much as possible, and I think that's it, because we do have this great opportunity. I think we get, I don't know if it's a cultural thing. It is. It's sort of the low self-esteem thing. We just get so kind of wound up in I'm not good enough, and like I can never do enough, and I'm not good enough, and I'll never make it. And it's, and that just, there's no benefit to that really. So I think we look at this precious opportunity that was, karmically extremely expensive, but we've got the perfect opportunity to charge up the bank account for another opportunity, just like the one that we have, That's my attitude anyway. I don't know. For what it's worth. All right. Okay, let's go on to the last list of 4. Can we open the back door? It's getting really hot. You guys are, exuding heat in here. It's not that. Okay, just a little. Oh, is that what was making the noise of the speaker before? Yeah, that just to get a little bit of cross circulation, I think is good. That might be good. I don't know. Are you guys hot? I'm hot, but I've got all the lights going on me too. So that'll be good. Oh, it's already better. That's good. All right. So the effects of karma. So we've got these karmic seeds, and for a complete karmic action, there's 4 results of that complete action. Remember, I kept saying, if all of those 4 components are complete, you're going to get all of these results. If not all 4 are complete, you're going to get some result, but not necessarily all 4 of these, right? So if part of the components are missing, the motivation's missing, you did it by accident, you regretted it, any of those things we were talking about before, you won't get all 4 of these results. But if you had all 4 of those components, like the deer hunter with the complete karma, you will get these results. So the first result is called the fruitional result, and that refers to the rebirth conditioned by that karma. Okay? So for heavy non-virtues, especially ones that are done with all of those factors, strong motivation, strong, way that you do the action, maybe the object is heavy, you'll get possibly a lower realm rebirth as a result of that karmic action. Okay, so the rebirth that's determined by that action, which will be in a suffering realm for the negative karmas. There's different suffering realms of existence. The human realm is actually considered to be on the good side. And then the animal realm is one of the suffering realm rebirths. The hungry ghosts or craving spirits is another one. And then many of the, what we usually call the hell realm rebirths, characterized by different kinds of extreme suffering determined by that karma. And then when you're again reborn as a human, you'll have these results, the results corresponding to the cause, and there's two of these. One is the experience that corresponds to the cause. And this is the one, sometimes we have a kind of a phrase in English or in American actually, what goes around comes around. That's the boomerang thing about karma, is that we'll experience something similar to that cause that we've created. And we looked at that for killing, and we said you might have threats to your life, illnesses, for example. So that's the what goes around comes around thing. That's the experience that corresponds to that cause. And that's what we usually think about when we think about karmic results, don't we? We think, oh, I'm going to experience that thing that I did to that other person. That's usually the way we think about it. And then the behavior that corresponds to the cause. And according to Buddhism, this is the worst one, because this means you have a habit of doing that thing, and you're much more likely to do it again. So if you do create a habit of killing, for example, and it's easy for you to kill, that's the result of your previous killing karma, and what else is it? A brand new cause for a whole nother cycle, isn't it? So that's a result of the past one, and you just did it again. So guess what? The wheel of misfortune just turned one more time. So according to Buddhism, this is the worst one. If you just experience the experience similar to the cause, great, it's done, finished. Whew. But this is considered to be the worst one. And they say, even, I was reading an article in Psychology, and they were even, this is very much accepted even in just ordinary psychology. And this article was saying, the first time you cheat on your spouse, it's really hard to do. Like, you have to overcome a lot of resistance to actually cheat. The next time it's like, yeah, sure, why not? It's much easier to do things. And so you see this actually in people, that they have such a habit of doing a non-virtue. Like, for somebody else, it would be really hard to do. I had a boyfriend once, back when I used to have boyfriends. What a disaster, I won't even go into that. And I realized at a certain point, he was a compulsive liar. And then he couldn't even tell the truth about anything, even if it didn't matter at all. Like, what did you have for lunch today? If it was a bologna sandwich, he'd say it was grilled cheese. Like, it doesn't even matter. But like, there was such a habit of deceit, right? That it's like, you can imagine how long that relationship lasted after I realized that. But there was such a habit of deceitfulness. And so you can really see how people get those bad habits. Like I said, if it was just experiencing the result and then it was finished, then it would be fine. But this one is considered the worst. And then the environmental results. And this is weird and hard to figure out. We'll look at it when we look at the karmic quiz. We'll see what some of the environmental results. Your environment is determined by your karma. What kind of an environment you're living in is determined by your karma. And these are non-intuitive. Like, you can kind of figure out the experience and the behavior similar to the cause, because it's similar to the cause. So you can kind of figure it out. This one's harder and kind of weird, and we'll look at those. But when you're born again as a human. So the complete karmas will have all four of these results. The incomplete ones will have some of them, but not all of them. And that's the difference between complete and incomplete. So like we were saying, if you aim at the deer with the full intention to kill and miss, you're not off the hook. You'll experience some of these, but not all of them. Okay? So questions about this list? We'll look at that more. So let's, oh, yeah.
You're thinking about karma. I'm always thinking a lot about the karma that I'm bringing from my past lives.
Yes.
All the baggage of that.
Yep.
Are there purification practices to try to purify? 'Cause I don't even know what karma
Well, exactly. And we'll look at that. When we look at purification practices, they'll purify everything, even the old stuff that you don't know. So we'll look at that when we do the practice. And Marianne very kindly ran out and got us the copies. So we might, if we have time, we'll probably have time today to do that. You think about specific things that you remember in this life, especially things that are especially heavy or recent, or things that you just know you have a habit to do. We always reflect on kind of those three categories, maybe lifelong heavy stuff, habitual stuff, recent stuff. And then you just say, wow, well, I know, in past lives I've done all this kind of stuff. Some of the results of the karmic quiz may give you a clue as to what some of those past life things are also. And that can be interesting because you go, wow, if I'm having this experience a lot in this life, it means I've created a lot of causes because this is like a habitual kind of experience for me too. And then you can think about that. But the purification also works even for the unknown ones. So that's good, because otherwise, it'd be hard if it was just like, oh, it works for what happened today that you can remember. Because often by nighttime, we're trying to review our day and we're like, what happened today? What did I have for lunch? Did I do a non-virgin? I have no idea. So even that, should be a little bit more accessible to our memory, but it isn't always, Yeah, good. All right. So let's look at the 10 non-virtues. Woohoo! And this is where we'll discuss. So this is not a list of everything that Lord Buddha said was non-virtuous, right? Because not everything fits under this list. But this was a list that he taught when he was just talking about general morality, general ethics, is avoiding these 10 non-virtues, okay? So we'll go through them one by one and look at them. And there's 3 that are physical, 3 of body, 4 of speech, and 3 mental ones. So this is interesting. We talked about this last night. Ed had a question about, I think it was ill will or maliciousness. Like you want to hurt someone, but you don't actually do any action of harm. What's that? Well, it could be a complete maliciousness karma, right? It's an incomplete killing or whatever, but it could be a complete maliciousness. So let's look at these. We'll discuss these one by one, and then we'll do our karma quiz. So killing, we've talked about that a little bit because that was the example that I gave. So the object is a human, including a fetus, right? So in Buddhism we say abortion is considered to be non-virtuous, but there's nothing wrong with contraception that prevents conception, right? So unlike, and I don't know if the Catholics, I think they're still the same, that they say no contraception. Buddhism says no problem at all with contraception that prevents conception, but we say the consciousness actually enters at the moment of conception, and from that point onwards, it's a human being. So it's different from the Western scientific, like the first trimester isn't really a human, and after that it's a human, and all of that stuff. Also, what's that? Yeah. And then we also say in Buddhism, animals down to the smallest insect. So Lord Buddha talked about what you could see with the naked eye, because in the time of the Buddha, they didn't have microscopes. So there's these big debates. Is a paramecium a sentient being? And what about a virus? And what about an algae and all of that? And who knows? Because the Buddha didn't really talk about that. But he said, even the tiniest insect, anything that you can see with the naked eye is considered killing to take the life of that being. And then you can do it by any method, poison, weapons, etc., etc. And then for killing, you also get killing karma if you ask someone specifically to kill for you. In fact, in the Buddhist monastic vows, traditionally the way that we get our food that we eat in the time of the Buddha, and still in Southeast Asia and South Asia, this is done by alms round. Now, you had to accept anything that was offered into your bowl. There's all this protocol about begging for your food, and you're not allowed to pick and choose and go, oh, I'd love another spoonful of that saffron rice and no, I'm trying to avoid sweets, so no chocolate chip cookie, please. You're supposed to just accept what's put in the bowl. The only thing you're allowed to refuse is meat that you know was killed especially specifically for you, right? Because that's close to this thing, even though you didn't ask for it, still it's too close. And there's a story about His Holiness the Dalai Lama once was staying somewhere and he saw the farmer kill the chicken for his lunch and he refused to eat it. So if you know it was killed specifically for you. But the killing karma says you need to make the request in order to get killing karma, right? And this relates to Chanel's question about vegetarianism. So we say just eating meat is not killing karma unless you kill the animal or had someone do it for you, but just to eat meat that you bought at the Safeway, that the butcher who doesn't know you at all did not kill at your special request. It's not a complete killing karma. However, a lot of us choose that is too, there is a chain of supply and demand that we don't want to be involved in at all, right? But it's not killing karma, but a lot of us choose ethically, hey, I don't even want to be involved, even remotely, with anything to do with it, so I'm going to be a vegetarian and avoid that. But it's not specifically a killing karma unless you have made the request yourself. And that makes sense, the imprint in your mind. You go to KFC and buy a bucket. It's not the same as when you're like, oh, look at that red rooster over there. Hey, how about, really different imprint in your mind just from eating meat. But again, like I said, a lot of people, not just Buddhists, a lot of people just choose, hey, I don't even want to have anything to do with it. Now, there's another whole ethical question, but I think it's important to separate from the killing karma question, and that's the ethical treatment of animals question, right? There's a whole thing. A lot of people say, I'd rather raise my own animals humanely and butcher them in a humane way than support factory farming. But I think it's important in our minds to separate the killing question from the ethical treatment of animals and whether we want to engage in anything to do with buying factory farmed meat, even if we eat meat. That's a whole separate question because it can be too, I have students come and they go, no, it's better for me to actually know the animal and raise it and butcher it myself rather than like the horrible overcrowding of the thing. And I go, that's two separate things. You're still killing. It's nice that you're humane, but you're still killing. There's two separate questions, two separate issues. Okay? Yes.
So I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
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 We went to a farm, conservation area, inundated with mosquitoes.
Yeah.
One of my daughters, we were getting eaten alive.
Yeah.
The moment we stepped out of the car to get into the house and everything, just broke down in tears, just not knowing
What to do. Yeah. Yeah. And it's important. I mean, I think we can get really creative about there's no problem at all to put on mosquito repellent, right? And that's fine. Like anything that will repel the pest without killing them. In California, it's all about the ants. We have these invasions of ants in the houses. It's not the cockroaches in New York. Like nothing wrong. And there are actually a lot of ways that you can keep yourself safe from, we have tons of ticks where I live in California, and there's ways you can remove the tick without killing them and put on certain things that repel it without killing it. So I think that kind of stuff is fine, and too late. Yeah. And then I think you leave and go to the store and buy mosquito repellent and come back. Honestly, sometimes you have to just make a decision that it's not worth my karma to be in this situation. I need to go deal with it in a way that won't create that. It's not always easy, but I think we have to, there are ways that we, like workarounds that do involve not killing. Yeah. Yeah. I know, I bet. Yeah, so always kind of think creatively. It's so easy in our culture, oh, just spray the raid, just kill it. That's kind of our mindsets, but you have to kind of think outside those boxes if you really are kind of trying to be serious and take on this morality. One student at a Dharma center had this dog that had all these fleas, and I kept saying after I heard the story, I was like, oh, there's so many ways to deal with fleas without killing them. It's like there's all these herbal things like pennyroyal and eucalyptus. Anyway, she felt like she couldn't get rid of the fleas, so she took this dilemma to her teacher, again, asking for permission to kill the fleas. And the teacher said, take the dog with the fleas around the stupa, make all of these prayers to the fleas that you're going to kill, that may they be reborn as your disciples in future lives. Like, don't do it just mindlessly because it's the easy thing to do. He said, if you feel that you have to do this thing and take the life of the being, at least do it consciously, change as many factors of those 4 factors on the previous sheet as you possibly can. A friend of mine in India, this Belgian guy who was studying Buddhism in India, and he had really, really bad worms. As one gets sometimes in India, he had really bad worms, and he just kept getting skinnier and skinnier and sicker and sicker and sicker, and he didn't want to take the worm medicine. And then he went to his teacher, and his teacher said, you could actually die. Like, this is bad. You actually need to take the worm medicine. And kind of the same thing as the person with the dog. He said, pray ahead of time, do all these practices, pray to the worms that, you have to take their lives to preserve your life. But the Lama said, you can be really beneficial to beings. It's like the greater good thing all over again. He was like, you're a Dharma practitioner, you're young. I don't want you to die. Like, you have all of this amazing potential. Better to take the worm medicine with regret and with consciousness and make prayers that, because of the karmic connection, even of killing them now, and so that's what he did, with regret. So sometimes we are pressed to that point, right, where it really almost is a matter of life and death, but anything less than that, often we can deal with it kind of more creatively. Yeah, any other questions about did that answer your question about the eating meat? Yeah, so it's a different issue than, just eating meat is different from killing. And like I said, but sometimes we choose to avoid even eating the meat so that nobody has to kill it, even though it's not the karma of killing. Yeah. Needs it, yeah. Yeah. But even if you eat for enjoyment, if you're not killing the animal or asking someone to kill it, it's not going to be killing karma. It might be a little mindless. Do you really need to? And that's another question. But yeah, and then some people really do. Some people's body types seem to really, need, or it seems that they do, like, seem to need meat to stay healthy. And then for that, that is a different motivation for doing it. Yeah, Annette, you had a question.
The topic of vegetarianism comes up, since I've been here, teachers bring it up and students bring it up as well. But I've never heard anybody say, well, maybe they have, but I don't recall, just talking about the aspect of vegetarianism as a way of practicing compassion towards the animal.
You haven't heard anybody say that?
Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
like, I just,
Yeah.
I'm a pseudo-vegetarian. I guess, I eat eggs.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
because I've not eaten them, and notice my hair falling out.
Yeah.
I have some protein here,
Right.
But, like, from my reason, and it could be different for everyone, is when I was younger, when I found out the actual process of where the meat came from, I had such an overwhelming compassion for the
Yeah.
that I just couldn't. I was like, I'm not eating meat.
Yeah.
And of course, my parents were like, I was, 10 years old, I guess, when I
Yeah.
was going to be vegetarian. because it was very difficult to find vegetarian food that would sustain me.
Right, right.
But I mean, that seems to me like that whole vegetarianism thing is an opportunity to try to.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of people's motivation. You know, I think that's the motivation of a lot of people, whether they think about karma or not. I mean, karma is one reason, but that's just about killing. That's not about actually being a vegetarian. I really think the reason to be a vegetarian is, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. Global economics is one, and sustainability and you know, greenhouse gases that come from, you know, waste of resources. There's so many of those, environmental and economic. But I think for most people who become vegetarians, compassion really is the main motivating force of like, I don't want to see animals being killed, you know, so I think that is really the main motivation. Yeah, Doug.
I have a question about our way that we look at the lives of animals, the way that we value the lives of animals more than we value the lives of plants, based on our ability to empathize with their way of experiencing the world.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I've heard it said many times that, well, plants aren't sentient. They're not sentient beings. And I don't believe that. I've had enough experiences with plants to know that they're perfectly sentient. They just experience a different aspect of the electromagnetic spectrum than we do. Therefore, we don't relate to it.
Yeah.
We don't value it as much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the important thing is to recognize that whatever it is that we have to consume, a life has ended for it. And we need to take that into consideration and have compassion and bless and offer the life.
Yeah, because that's just, yeah.
That's the only way we live, is to kill something. We don't like it, but we're creating that karma every day. We don't consider it that because a plant we don't consider alive. Why?
And that's just the Buddhist view, that the Buddha differentiated between plants and animals, saying, you know, more, and it's because of the potential to attain enlightenment, really. You know, we say both plants and animals are living beings, but animals are sentient beings because they have consciousness and the ability eventually to attain enlightenment. So that was kind of the basis of the Buddhist. But I think what you say is, you know, to be as mindful and conscious and heedful as possible about our choices, for sure. You know, whether it's avoiding factory farming, eating organic, you know, there's so many ethics around it. And that could be like a whole nother weekend, like the ethics of our choices as consumers, for sure. But I think, you know, your point is well taken, that we do have to really try in this world to be as mindful as possible about all those choices. Yeah.
Just like to share, I do know a teacher, a master who teaches vegetarian. He asks his students to, as much as possible, to be vegetarian. And the teaching behind it is that if you look at, to your point about animals and plants, in the rebirth in the lower realms, some of us get reborn into animals. So we all have been animals before. So when we eat the animals are like big, father and mother.
Yeah. And that's,
So it's that cycle of thought, like when you eat animals, also you could think about in your past life you could have been an animal yourself.
yeah. Good. All right. So, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
So forget about eating lobster.
It's up to you. It's up to you, Mimi. It's a sentient being, according to Buddhism.
Because we actually buy it live.
Oh, don't, yeah. We all know how it works. That's pretty gnarly, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Answering this question saved me hours every evening for months on end. But so again, with my girls, right? We
Yeah.
live in a somewhat rural area. We have a cat in our family who likes to taste nice, likes to show us that, hey, I've killed something.
Yeah.
Back for you. So they like to intercede, and you know, they're just in my mind
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I've been juggling this for a long time. My husband's like, as far as the karma goes, Kat's going to get some really bad karma here, but do we interject?
I'll just tell you my personal opinion on this is that if that sentient being whose life is in danger has the karma that I'm around, I'm going to intervene. The hawk might get it later when I'm not around, but no being that's life is in danger in my proximity is going to stay in danger because I'm going to intervene. And that's just my own ethics. I mean, what you say is true, of course. You have no idea what's going to happen later, but I just do that for me because I can't not do that. If I see that happening in front of me, I'll intervene. I mean, I do that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's just my choice. But you know what? I feel like we need to move on a little bit because we're getting all wound up in killing and we've got 9 more to go. Can we move on? Maybe we can we're going to take a tea break and maybe we can discuss killing more during the tea break if you really want to. But let's move on because we got a lot more to do. Okay, stealing is another physical one, and that's taking anything that hasn't been offered to you, right? So taking something, a possession that belongs to someone else. Now, you have to have the recognition it belongs to someone else. If you take the jacket off the peg that it looks just like yours and you think it's yours and you take it home, the recognition wasn't there. You thought it was your possession. So you need to know that it belongs to somebody else in order for it to be stealing. If there are possessions shared within, like, for example, a family, that are shared. It's not stealing to use those things. If somebody has given you permission to use their things, it's not considered stealing. So it's really just taking something of value that belongs to someone else, that it's definitely that they consider it theirs, and then you're taking something that belongs to them. However, I think it is really helpful sometimes when we're practicing this to practice at that subtler level of just taking something, not taking anything that has not explicitly been offered to us. So for example, as a Buddhist, if you see a $10 bill lying on the sidewalk in public, if there's a lost and found, you take it and put it in there, but I wouldn't pick it up because it has not been released by the previous owner. So you can take stuff out of the free box, don't take stuff out of the lost and found is basically it, right? So it's like not taking, but then there's certain things that are just, shared by a community, and there's no problem at all in using those things that are shared by a community. Now, we might think, oh, I'm off the hook with stealing. One of the things we really have to watch out for is copying media, bootleg media. DVDs, CDs, computer programs. I was teaching this course in karma in Bogota in Colombia many years ago, and I got to this point of like the bootleg software, and one guy raised his hand and he goes, "Who doesn't have bootleg software on their computer?" And I was the only one that raised my hand. I didn't take it as a rhetorical question. They're like, oh my, I went back like 2 years later. They picked me up at the airport. And they're like, oh my God, we're still talking about that karma course. One woman said, in Bogota, like a lot of developing countries, there's like kiosks on the street with bootleg DVDs and CDs and stuff like there is. You don't see that much in the States. Or I don't know, maybe you do. I don't know. Flea markets have that kind of stuff, but not, So this woman said she's trying to be a good Buddhist, and she goes to the Apple store to buy the software for her new program. And the guy at the Apple store said, "What are you even doing here? The guy half a block down has that software." And she goes, "No, my Buddhist teacher said I have to buy this." And he looks at her like she's nuts. They had to special order it from the US. They didn't even have software in the Apple store because, like, who's going to buy it? So that's something we have to be really careful about. And we were talking about, like, the progression of your practice. And I was teaching this in New Zealand, and this one student who's actually English, who lives in New Zealand, and 5 years after the Karma Course, he sent me an email going, Today, I finally erased the last bootleg software off my computer. Like, it took him 5 years to replace all the bootleg software with like the proper thing. And then he finally was able to like confess / rejoice / whatever that email was all about. And I was like, great, that's awesome. So sometimes it's a progression, but that's, the lamas say, follow the copyright laws in your country. Really simple, right? Just follow the copyright laws in your country. And then people go, oh, but it's like Google or Apple and it's a multinational corporation that's raping the... Don't worry about that. Just worry about your karma. You know, just that's all you need to worry about. Don't worry about the Robin Hood stealing from the... Just, you know, it is your karma and it is stealing no matter what kind of multinational monster corporation is, you know. And it makes a difference. I was teaching karma once in England, and another British student was a rock star. He was in some rock band, of course, I had never heard of. Everybody else knew about it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And he said how much it's actually hurting the recording industry and these recording artists, all of the bootleg, you know, because everything's digital now, so everybody can just download it for free. And he said, I can't make a living the way I used to be able to do with my music because of this. So it really does have an impact even on recording artists and people like that. Yeah, Jeremy. I thought I might have done with somebody in the room. Sorry, Jeremy, I just ruined your day, didn't I?
The computer has fought back.
Yeah.
I collected viruses.
By doing that, yeah.
Over and over, and as I slowly stopped doing it, I got less viruses.
Yeah.
And now I had to fix my computer and give it a whole new rebirth. I haven't touched it yet.
Yeah.
I don't have a need to.
Right.
I'm not going to go and get stolen information.
Yeah.
That's probably the most primary.
Yeah.
PC for 10 years. And then, but it's harder to get stolen.
Yeah, I mean, because they're putting safeguards in there, you know, much more. Yeah. It used to be easier, and now they're putting safeguards, which protects our karma. Isn't that a good thing? Right? 'Cause, you know, but that is, like I say, often it's easy to kind of look at stealing and go, oh, I'm not hitting little old ladies over the head and stealing their pocketbooks. Like, this is not. But again, you know, taking the office supplies from the cabinet at work. You know, as one of my friends says, it's not the nuclear blast that will kill you, it's the low-level radiation. And why we're not enlightened is not because we've like stabbing people and robbing the bank. It's all of this low-level non-virtue that we're doing all the time. So if you're really serious about your Dharma practice, and if you're really serious about karma, you're going to look at the low-level radiation, even if it's the pencils from the supply cabinet at work and all the phone calls from the phone. All of that stuff. I see eyes getting wide, so I know that I've hit a nerve with a couple of, but you know, if we're really going to be serious about it. When I first started studying Buddhism, before I was a nun, I had a friend who lived in San Francisco, my oldest friend, and when there was a teaching, I would often stay at her apartment, and you know, I'd be in the shower, and I realized that I didn't have my shampoo. This is when I still had long hair. And then instead of just taking her shampoo, even though it's my oldest friend who's like my sister, I'd like walk out in the hall dripping wet and go, can I borrow some shampoo? So it got to the point where I'd walk in the house for the weekend with my overnight bag, and she'd go, the shampoo, the soap, the soy milk, the tea, the coffee, anything you want in the house is offered. And it's actually really great to kind of do that with your Buddhist friends who are house guests and really offer things explicitly so you don't put them in that situation of, you know, taking something and they're like, I think a tea bag's probably okay, but they didn't really, you know, just get in the habit. And it's really nice to kind of create that culture. Not only does it give you an opportunity to offer, and it really saves them from having to second guess, you know, is it okay? So I think it's really nice to do that and do it at that low level. But that's what it is for us often is, you know, more about copying software than it is really stealing things that belong to other people. Sexual misconduct, and you read a lot of things about the lists of what's sexual misconduct and what's not. Alex Berzin, a Buddhist scholar, has a great sort of a analysis of when certain things got added to the lists in the commentaries of what's sexual misconduct. The lamas mostly say for us, anything non-consensual, obviously, so forcing your sexual attentions onto anybody. Molesting children, for example, also anybody who can't really give their consent. And for most of us, cheating on a committed partner. So they say mostly for us it would be some kind of adultery. You don't need to be married, but it's just if you have a monogamous committed thing, or the other person that you're interested in does, just don't do it. Don't go there, okay? Now, if the person presents themselves to you as single and you believe it, then it's not sexual misconduct for you because you did not recognize, oh, that other person is in a relationship. Now, I know these days there's all these like unique things and three-ways and polyamory and all these things. Personally, I don't think they ever work. Like everybody I know has been in one of those relationships, somebody gets hurt of it, but that's up to you. But if you have some kind of a commitment with someone else that we're going to be monogamous partners, then if you have sexual activity with anybody else, it's considered to be sexual misconduct. Or if you have sexual activity with someone who's in a relationship, right? That's what it's considered. And then all this stuff about, well, you read stuff in the text, like there's one text that says, don't do it in the daytime. And you're like, wait, what? Well, in ancient India, basically everybody lived in one room in a hut. So if you did it in the daytime, you're going to frighten the children and embarrass grandma. So that's why that was in there. So some of these things were cultural. Some things like oral sex were considered culturally just really disgusting in the past. A friend of mine who's a monk actually had a long conversation with Lama Zopa about oral sex, and I was not present during that conversation. It's like to be a fly on the wall. And got it taken off the list of sexual misconduct. And I'm like, what did you do to convince Lama Zopa? And he's like, I basically told him it's pretty normal. Like back in when some of those texts were written, oral sex was like bestiality or something. It was seen as something like just super disgusting. So it kind of made it on the list because it's going to make quite an imprint in your mind if you do something that's just kind of beyond the pale. Whereas, there's certain sexual practices that for kind of modern people are not, so things change. So there are some cultural variations, but it's basically, to keep in mind, are you hurting someone, betraying someone? Is somebody going to get hurt because of your sexual activity? Thich Nhat Hanh raises the bar even higher, and I almost resist saying this because I don't want you to think that this is what I'm presenting, but it's very interesting, Thich Nhat Hanh, when he talks about morality, and he says, don't have a sexual relationship with somebody that you're not prepared to be in a long-term committed relationship with. And I was like, well, that's interesting. But that's not what this means, right? That's not, that's kind of raising the bar higher. So these are the three. Any questions about that one? Okay. Should we power on to the speech ones? All right, let's go through the speech ones, and then we'll have a little bit longer tea break, and then we'll come back and do the karma quiz. So the speech lying, so that is any speech that's intended to deceive someone else, right? To lead them to believe something that's not true. Now, even though it's considered under the speech non-virtue, you can also do it with gestures or with silence. So somebody asks you something and you go, or anything like that that leads them to believe something that's not true. If that's your intention, it's considered lying even though it's not actual verbal speech, right? Now, for this one, you have to have the recognition that the thing that you're saying is not true. If you think the thing that you're saying is true, but it's not, it's not considered lying, right? Because you didn't have the recognition of the untruth. But this is where we have to be really, really careful about passing along unverified rumors. Oh, I heard that, yada, yada, yada. So that kind of relates to the gossip one. We have to be careful, verify before you start spreading around information. Be sure that it's true. It's not lying unless you know that it's untrue, but it's a, slippery slope there as well with lying. Doug, did you have a question? Self-deception, that's interesting. How much is it self-deception and how much is it sort of rationalization?
I would consider it the same thing.
Yeah. Then I think
it's hurting us and we do it anyway.
Yeah. I think we're not really deceiving ourselves, though. I think we're kind of trying to talk ourselves into being able to do something that we really want to do that we know we shouldn't do, which is different from deceit. So it is a little bit more on the sort of rationalization side. And that would just be related to ignorance. According to Buddhism, we're trying to obscure somehow our mental kind of clarity and our mindfulness and our cognizance deliberately, which is just going to create some, weird kind of karmic result of deliberate ignorance almost, more than deceit, I think, for that one. Yeah, good question. Interesting to think about. Yeah.
How about the age-old, this is make you look fat?
Yeah. And that always comes up, right? And the lamas have a really interesting workaround for that. So the classic, one of my teachers, Geshe Jampa Tekchog, the classic thing in the scripture is, again, going back to the deer hunter, this is going to come up again. So you're walking through the forest and the deer comes tearing past, panting with, foam. And then the hunter with the gun right behind it going, which way did the deer go? Right? Do you lie or do you tell the truth? You have a vow not to lie. So my lama said, and this is great, and you can really do this. He said, just change the subject. Just be like, wow, what a beautiful day. Like, isn't it nice outside? Just talk about something totally irrelevant, or does this dress make me look fat? Instead of going, yeah, you actually look like a cow. You're like, oh, I've got a scarf that would look great with that. You're being kind. You're not lying that it looks good. And it's sort of the greater good. I mean, we can get away with things. You just say something slightly irrelevant and sort of change the subject. It's better than an outright lie. However, even with the deer thing, I mean, if it's something like that, hopefully we're never going to be in that position. You can just say, I don't really want to answer that question. I mean, if somebody's putting you on the spot to tell them something that's actually non-virtuous, I think we need to be braver to just go, look, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. Not with the dress and the fat thing. I think then we just sort of divert somehow. But like with certain things, I think we need to get braver about, kind of setting a limit to our morality and kind of letting that be known. We always think we have to please everybody all the time and give them all the information that they are at. We just go, I don't really feel comfortable talking about that right now. And that goes for all of these too, and we'll get into that more. But try and get around it without an outright lie. If you have to lie for the greater good, that's lesser of an evil than the deer getting shot. Like if you have to say, no, it went that way, go for it. But there are workarounds that you can just sort of like change the... Don't worry about people thinking you're weird, by the way. If you're a Buddhist and you're really trying to work with your morality, just dare being weird to save your ethics. It's worth it. It really is. It really is. Just have people think you are hard of hearing or crazy, and it's fine. It's really fine because it keeps you from entering into all of that non-virtue. It's like, yeah, excuse me, what? What did you say? They'll just get bored and like irritated and leave you alone. Okay, divisive speech, and this is any speech that's meant to divide people that have some kind of a relationship, right? So your intention is to create a rift. Now, it could be people that have a harmonious relationship and are doing really well, or it could be people that are already a little bit on the outs and you're making it worse, right? So it's any kind of people that have some kind of relationship, either you're creating a new rift or making the existing one worse with divisive speech. And you have to, again, in order to get the full karma, recognize that that's the effect of your words. You may say something that has that effect and that wasn't your intention at all, right? You say something about somebody and the other person is like horrified by it, and then it makes them not like that person anymore or something like that. But just being mindful about our speech in general. But if you didn't know that that was going to be the effect of it, it's not considered divisive speech karma, even if it has that outcome, okay? And then harsh speech, that is critical speech, belittling, humiliating, criticizing in a harsh way, another person. And again, you have to intend to criticize, belittle, hurt their feelings. If you say something about them and they're sensitive about some aspect of their appearance, for example, and you hurt their feelings and you didn't mean to at all, that's not considered harsh speech because it's not your intention. Being extremely tall, as you may have noticed when I walk in and out of the room, I have people say all these really clever things to me, like, how's the weather up there? And do you play basketball? And I'm like, wow, I never heard that before. Wow, you're really tall. And I'm like, what, really? Oh, you're kidding. I thought I was kind of and I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. I don't care. I'm luckily not the slightest bit self-conscious, but if somebody said things like that to me and I felt humiliated, but that's not their intention. They're just kind of trying to say something and they think they're being cute and clever and they don't realize that you've heard it 800 billion times before in your life, So that kind of thing. So it needs to be the intention behind it, not necessarily the effect. And then idle gossip. This is an interesting one. This is defined as talking about things that are meaningless that you consider to be meaningful, especially prevalent in an election year. Oh my God, like how much do we really need to be talking about this? So the classic examples are politics, wars, from the time of Lord Buddha, wars. They didn't have television, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Facebook in the time of Lord Buddha, but it's about wasting time on meaningless things. So I think even though it isn't necessarily speech, how much time are we wasting on, media that is not necessarily meaningful? I think we need to keep informed for sure. I'm a total social justice advocate and I really like to be informed about what's going on in the world, but not to the point where it's just kind of 24/7 Facebook feeds. That's just, and this is about, it wastes time talking about things that are not so meaningful. And how much can you engage in this before you start drifting upwards? How much can you be talking about people who aren't around, right? Or some situation before it starts to be harsh speech, divisive speech, lying. So that's another danger. Even though we say, in and of itself, people are like, God, what's the problem with this? It's not so bad. But easy to drift in this direction with that one, isn't it? The more you engage in it. Yes, lots of questions. Okay, let's go 1, 2, 3, right down the row. Yeah,
how do you operationalize or define meaninglessness or unimportance? Because of course that's
Yeah.
relative to some extent, right? Because something that might seem meaningless might have some relative importance to.
Yeah, I think it's about, like it says in the scripture, be informed, connect with other people. So one of the exceptions to this is, when you're meeting someone new. It's not like you have to just be talking about the Four Noble Truths all the time or something. You're getting to know somebody, you're trying to make a connection. Hey, where are you from? And how about your family and all of that? So it's about, but like if it just kind of goes on and on and on in a way that's just distracting, and especially in a way that could go in this direction. That's it. So it's not so cut and dried, but there are exceptions. Like they say for a Dharma teacher, you have to connect to people. You have to be personable and friendly. You can't just be like, oh no, just talk to me about the Four Noble Truths. I'm not going to talk about anything else ever. But it's just about kind of thinking about the time wasting aspect and the going in this direction aspect to kind of gauge. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think, a lot of people with the speech ones, when I teach karma courses or intro courses and we're talking about speech, they're like, oh my God, I can't eat lunch with my coworkers anymore at all. Because it's all of this every day at lunch. Do I just sit in my car with my sandwich every day? And I think we can really raise the bar with our conversation with our friends and coworkers. It's like people just gossip because they don't know any better. And then you can kind of just very gently, not in some self-righteous way, but you can kind of steer the conversation maybe into something a little bit more meaningful, right? And positive. And again, not going, don't talk about that. That's non-virtue. That's like but you just steer it. Like we can influence others, and we are all the time. And a lot of times people don't mean to be doing this. They just kind of don't know any better. It's just bad habits. So don't isolate yourself in a way that people are going to think you're like the weirdo. Oh, they became a Buddhist and now they just eat their sandwich in their car. It's weird. So we don't want to be weird and alienating to people. We want to be accessible and inspiring. And you can, just kind of think about ways to move in a more meaningful direction. Yeah.
You answered my question with that.
Was that it? The eating lunch in your car thing? Yeah.
If you get invited to dinner parties, everyone's doing that. And
Yeah. Well, I found this great trick that works super well. I'll clue you in on my technique that I discovered. So let's say someone disses someone behind their back for something that they do or say or some habit that they have, and everybody starts that one, that snarky conversation about the person that's not at the dinner party. I always own what they're complaining about in the other person. Like, let's say that person is always like coming to work late and not doing their work. And I'll just say, oh, I used to have a real problem with that. I wasn't very responsible at work, and this is what I did to correct it. That just nips it in the bud. You just own whatever it is that they're complaining about for the other person when they're getting divisive. And it's weird. They just kind of are like, wait, what just happened? You do kind of an Aikido move with their non-virtuous speech. And it works like a charm. I did that once kind of just instinctively. And it works so well. And I was like, wow. Or you can do the crazy thing, which also works. And I'll give you an example of this. Once in a group of friends, there was this guy where it was a work situation, and there was a new employee that I super connected with. It's like he came in, he was my new best friend, and we super connected and we're getting along really well. Somebody who hadn't been in the work situation for a while came in, and she came up to me the next day after she came back, and she came really close to me, and I knew she was going to gossip because she was like 2 inches away, and she kind of like indicates him with this eyebrow, and she's just like, oh, that one. When somebody calls somebody that one, that it's not going to be good. What happened? She's like, oh, that one. God, I'm having real problems with him. And I was just thinking, oh my God, she's talking about my new best friend. I can't believe this is happening. So I just went, oh, I like him so much. We're just super getting along. Like we've been having these great conversations. Like she's dissing him, expecting me to agree with her. And I just acted as if she said, I love this new guy. I was like, I just love him. He's just great. She just looked so shocked. She just kind of went, and then she just did a 180 and walked away. And she never gossiped to me about anybody behind there. I think it was such a shock to her. I like pulled the rug out from under her. And then afterwards I was like, that worked so well. I'm going to have to remember that one. I just totally acted like she'd said the opposite because I did not want to get into it at all, and I didn't want to reinforce what she was saying. So be brave enough to be weird at work. It really does help. I think we'll have one more question from Ed, and then we'll take a break. Yeah.
Harsh speech that is directed towards an inanimate object.
Yes, we say the object has to understand your words and the full impact of your insults. So even your dog, right? It's not nice to scream at your dog, but they won't understand the subtlety of your insults. So even though it's not great, we say the object of the harsh speech has to understand you. Now, it's still not good. It's sort of an aggression imprint of like kicking the TV and all of that kind of stuff. It's not great, but it's not a complete harsh speech until the object, it's completed when the object understands what you said.
It does lay down a bogus seed.
Yeah, for sure. But you wouldn't get the complete result of a harsh speech karma. Yeah. Any more about the speech ones, and then I think we'll take a little break. Yes.
Speaking in an angry tone, is that considered harsh speech if the words are not angry?
Yeah, right.
You're just really mad, but you're not saying mean things to them. You're just trying to get them to stop.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Anger there can be a lot of anger there.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah. I think, that's an interesting one. The angry, because sometimes you're doing it, like we're talking about, like getting your kid not to run into the street. You have to be forceful and wrathful. And again, you're not belittling, humiliating, criticizing. It's more like that. If your language is, oh, you can't do anything right, and I can't believe you brought that report card back, you're never going to amount to a thing. That would be harsh speech. But if you're like, in a time where you know that being a bit forceful is going to have a beneficial impact, sometimes we do that, and then I don't think it's considered. This is really about humiliating, criticizing, Swearing is also considered harsh speech, so swearing, and that's terrible because I still have a really bad habit. But sometimes you'll overhear it, and it really is ugly. It's like I was sitting on the front porch yesterday just reading a book because the veranda gets nice sun in the afternoon, and there was like 6 young guys across the street. I swear to God, every other word was an F-bomb. It was like they could not say one sentence without 3 or 4, and I was like, this is amazing. And then they sort of noticed me and they chilled. Because they're like, uh-oh, they had like some motorcycle they were all looking at. It was like the F this and the F that and the F that. And I was like, wow, they can't say one sentence without 3 or 4 F-bombs. And, I was just kind of laughing at it. But I was like, really? Is our language so constricted to like a swear word every other word? And then they sort of slunk off. I think they were embarrassed when they know. But yeah, it's about, some of that is about the intention too. Yeah. One more and then we'll take a break. Yeah.
According to my in terms of swearing, I think there's 2 different things. If you just say a slang word out of expression,
Yeah.
that's one thing, but if you say it intended to hurt somebody, that's
Yeah, but I think, it's said in the scripture, and my teachers have said, even swearing is considered harsh. And I think it can feel normal to you, but you have to be careful about who's doing the listening, and it really does sound quite ugly to do it. And so I think, if we're going to be mindful with our speech, it's just something to start. It's very, very common, like the young guys across the street. So common that we do that, but not everybody has that same level, and for some people it might actually be like, ooh, wow, oh, that's so harsh, so just kind of trying to be more mindful, even if it's not our intention to be hurtful with those words. Yeah. Let's take a break. Can we hold off? I think we had a couple more questions, but I think we're overdue. Why don't we take a tea break until 3:20, a nice 20-minute tea. Wow, how exciting. Go ahead, just knock yourselves out with a 20-minute break, and then we'll come back, because then we'll do the karma quiz and talk about purification when we come back.
Opportunity for idle gossip.
Yeah. Okay, just saying. Remember what we just did. Don't forget during the break. Okay. Oh, we'll finish the
We might have some loners lying around. Do we have loners? Okay, great. Thank you.
great service for many people who can't potentially make it, you know? It's a good thing. Whatever spreads, whatever works.
It's a good service for me too, because
Yes.
Oh, great.
Very beneficial.
You know,
Put them out
yeah,
now, or-
let's wait, and I think we'll get to that point. Yeah, we'll just hold off, and then you can pass them out if, when we get to that point. Thank you. Okay. Home stretch. So let's just do the last 3 of the 10 non-virtues. So covetousness, and that is wishing to possess something that belongs to someone else, right? So it's not just admiring somebody's dress, but it's actually wishing to possess something that belongs to someone else. And it's complete when you decide to take actions to possess that thing. That's the completion of covetousness. So you can see how something could be an incomplete stealing, but a complete covetousness. Let's say you decide you want to possess something that belongs to someone else. You make a plan to get it for yourself, and you just don't follow through in some way. It could be a complete covetousness karma, but an incomplete stealing karma, right? So it's kind of halfway between attachment and stealing in a way, but it could be complete. Yeah.
How does this work in terms of wanting to develop internal qualities like of our teachers? It's like,
Yeah, well, you don't want them not to have it. So it's about wishing to possess. I mean, admiration is a great thing. And so you go, wow, His Holiness is so compassionate. I would be so great. That's totally virtuous. But it's like, if you wanted to have the thing that the other person then would not any longer have, you know? Yeah. So with the personal quality, it is kind of weird, unless it's, you could see it more for something like admiration. Like somebody's being admired. You want the admiration they're getting, and you want them to have less admiration and you to have more. Something like that would be a quality, like that person, you know, has some kind of quality and they're getting a lot of respect and admiration. You want that for yourself in a way that, you know, you want them not to have it. It's harder to see. It's a little bit more subtle with the qualities. Yeah. You know, that's fine. If you want to possess things that you have the money to buy, that's okay. You know, I mean, it might be a little bit attachment. You'd have to look at the attachment, but that's more of a mental affliction. It wouldn't be covetousness in the sense, like this is really about you wanting to possess some belonging that belongs to someone else. Something's in a store, believe me, the shopkeeper really wants you to want it. You know, and it's fine, and they're dying for you to pay. You know, so that's okay. You know, you might want to look at greed and attachment and thinking that that thing is going to give you happiness, but that's more on the level of like a mental affliction thing or a wrong view of like, yeah, that possession is going to make me happy. But
The reason I asked that, I guess, is because I thought I read in Liberation in the Palm of Her Hand about covetousness that Venerable Rinpoche gives an example of when we monks go into the market and we can be committing covetousness the whole time.
yeah, and that's different. There's a monastic vow that's a different kind of level. And we're not actually, one of our vows is we're supposed to only have 13 possessions as monastics. Now we add 2 more, the cell phone and the laptop, right? But traditionally, so if you went out, if you have vows that you're restricted to 13 possessions and you go out and your mind is just filled with all this craving and grasping. So that's what he was talking about, because he was talking mostly to a monastic audience when he gave that teaching. So it's a different level than lay people. That you guys are allowed to have more than 13 things, right? Yeah, so it's like that.
I
Yeah. No, that was like, what's that? Yeah, right. Onesies. That's cute. And we'll talk about that in terms of the 12 links, because that comes up too in terms of how do lay people practice and how do monastics practice. Reducing even the sense contact with certain things that could develop a lot of grasping and attachment. So for us, that's sort of everything. So, like, as a monastic, it's just weird, like, to go around a shopping mall window shopping. Like, that's like a really weird thing. Whereas for you guys, it's fine. But for us, it's sort of like, oh, we'll just want all these things, and then we're supposed to live off the offerings of lay people. So are they really going to buy me a 52-inch flat screen? Like, why would I even want, you know what I mean? That's a different level, I think, for the monastics than the lay people. Well, that's completely up to you. One thing I do find, we could discuss that after class. I mean, one thing that I notice a lot of Dharma students do find happens just naturally with their practice is kind of a wish to simplify. Like, if you're really trying to develop awareness, if you're really trying to develop your mindfulness practice, a lot of people find just this urge very spontaneously. It's not like they feel like they should, but all of a sudden you want to unclutter a little bit and maybe get rid of stuff and maybe kind of look at how much time you spend on TV and internet. So it's sort of a very natural process, I think, of the practice. Often I find that even if people, are not the slightest bit interested in becoming a monastic, but they find, as one of my friends who's a teacher said, everything you possess takes part of your mental real estate to keep track of your possessions. And so you're trying to meditate well, and your mind is always scattered by a little piece of it going to every possession you have. So it's sort of this natural progression often of students to simplify on whatever level, either if it's in terms of possessions or activities or even kind of relationships. And yeah, so that is something that happens really natural. But I don't think, sometimes people apologize to me for not being a monk or a nun, and I'm like, who said you should be? Like what? It's a lifestyle choice that some people choose to do, but it's not like the end point that we're all somehow progressing towards by any means, so don't, that sometimes happens that people are like, oh, I still have a boyfriend. And I'm like, okay, like, when did you take a celibacy vow that you have to commit? Oh, never. Oh, well then, like, have a boyfriend. It's fine, It's just a different lifestyle that actually, the Buddha kind of designed to simplify so that you can meditate really well. It does accomplish that. It's like, it really is a simplified life that a lot of the distractions are taken away. But it's suitable, always has been, for a small percentage of people. Even in the time of Lord Buddha, it's not like everybody that it was his student became a monk or nun, and it's not like a natural progression necessarily at all. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
It's not actually a question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share an experience I had this week of selling my table saw. It has been my lifelong dream. I'm 65.
Yeah.
Lifelong dream to do woodworking. I've had this table saw now for 17 years, and I've hardly used it.
Yeah.
Make progression on why I'm not using it.
Yeah.
But I find that there's not this big relief, but it just feels so right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a struggle to get rid of it.
Yeah.
The simplification thing, it really came down to that. I find that coming here, I look at my life more realistically.
Right.
Well, if I want to do 12 different crafts, I need to work, I have a husband, I need to cook, I need to take care of the house, plus all the other things.
Yeah. That's right.
Can I really devote my time to a craft
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think just being, coming here has helped me
Mm.
to be more realistic
Mm.
about what I can do.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said, it's sort of a natural progression. I mean, some people ask me that about like being a nun, and they're like, oh, but you had to give up all this stuff. And I said, well, all of that stuff kind of like I'd given up just little by little naturally as a result of practice. And then actually, when I got ordained, it was this huge relief because nobody really expected me to go to brunch or their birthday party or all these things that I really wasn't interested in doing anymore. And like my outfit kind of liberated me from a lot of the social expectation of the things that I did. So it wasn't about giving up stuff I really wanted to do and now I have to like slap my hands at all. It was like a natural progression that then finally when I changed my outfit is like, oh, what a relief, because nobody expects me to do any of those things anymore. So I can just be freed to like focus on my practice, you know? So it is, as you found in your experience, kind of very natural. It's not like, oh, I shouldn't do this, this, and this. If it's like that, it's miserable and it's not going to last, you know?
It's also self-identity.
Yeah, that's right.
Myself as a woodworker, but I really
Yeah. And sometimes that's the hard, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow when we talk about the view that we have of ourself. Wow, it's easy to give away the stuff. Giving up our concept of who we are, that's the hardest, even if it bears no relationship to reality at all, you know, which often it does not, you know. I remember when I got into Buddhism and I was thinking about ordination, and then I was like, oh, but I can't go out dancing. You know, because when I was in my early 20s, I was always going out to, you know, clubs and doing this whole life in San Francisco. And then I actually calculated how long it had been since I'd actually been out to a club dancing. And I was like, I can't even actually stay awake past about 9:30. I mean, I used to go out at 11:30 because it's like uncool to go out to, or, you know. And then I actually calculated, I was like, oh, that was 20 years ago. But I still had this idea of myself as somebody who loves to go out. And even though it hadn't been my reality for so long, but the concept was still there. So it was kind of like your woodworking thing a bit.
is that, because I appreciate so many of the arts, it doesn't mean that I have to do them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because it's all about priorities, really. I mean, we only have a certain amount of time in our life. At a certain point, I mean, when you're 22, like Lori is, you can do everything in the world. And then the rest of us have to prioritize with whatever time we have left, which we have no idea if it's 5 minutes or 30 years, but it's limited. So, yeah, it's about limitation. All right. So, maliciousness, that is, sometimes this is called ill will, and it's the intent to harm, and it's complete when you decide to engage in a harmful action. So you haven't done it yet. It's still mental, right? But it's complete when you decide, yes, I'm going to engage in harm, even before you've done it. That's the completion of maliciousness. So you could see any of these harmful actions could be incomplete if you haven't done it, but it could be a complete maliciousness karma, just because you've decided that you want to, you know, harm another being. And then wrong views. And this is denying, even though you have all evidence to show that it's true, denying one of the fundamental things taught by Lord Buddha and really kind of going against it. So denying past and future lives, denying the law of cause and effect, denying the potential for enlightenment. Now, this doesn't mean you're a new student, you're just checking these ideas out, you're not convinced yet. We wouldn't say that you have wrong view, but we would say, okay, you have enough evidence to show you that these things are valid, and you're just kind of in a contrary way going against it and spreading that view around. That would be considered wrong view. So it's not, you know, as many of us that didn't grow up in Buddhist culture and all of these are new ideas and we're just checking it out and we're not 100% convinced, that's fine. But it's like, you know, kind of deliberately going contrary to the teachings of the Buddha, which, if you deny cause and effect, the possibility of enlightenment, the possibility of future lives, what just happened to your spiritual path? Like it just fell apart, didn't it? Because it's predicated on all of those things, right? So that's why wrong view is up there. So any questions about that? Yeah.
I have a question that's more closely related to wrong view.
Okay.
And reincarnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I was thinking, is it dependent designation? Sort of, it doesn't really go with time. Kind of, you can go backwards and forwards in time. With reincarnation, can my future life, could it be end up being in the past?
Yeah. That's
Or
no.
my past lives, could they be in the future, or is
Right.
time linear?
Yeah.
So then,
Yeah. So I'll relate to you a little story, as I often do, that a student, I was with my first teacher in India, Kirti Sanchab Rinpoche, and a student asked something similar. He said to Rinpoche, so I know time isn't linear. Rinpoche, can you explain how time really works? Because I know it isn't really about like linear past, present, future, and kind of a similar question to what you asked. And then Rinpoche just looked at him very kindly and said, I could explain to you how time works, but actually at your level of realization, you wouldn't really get it, even if I explained it. So he said, for you, just work with past, present, and future. Like that will function for you right now. And then when you're at the level that you get how it really works, then you'll get it. So I thought that was awesome. It's like, just work with past, present, and future. That'll work for you, even though it's not the whole story. Yeah. Yeah. Don't say that, Mimi. Yes, you will. Cause and effect. Don't forget. All right. Anything else with the 10 non-virtues? Yes.
Cause and effect karma, and I guess in being malicious.
Yeah.
You have I guess anybody in management or a supervisor or something always has it to the point where, you've got to look at an employee and go.
Yeah. It's, again, it really goes to your motivation. Are you intending to do that person harm, or because of your responsibility as the head of a department in a company and you've got an employee and you've given them many choices, or you just have to downsize and you'll do your best for them, you'll write them a good recommendation, you'll do your best to network on their behalf, and with regret, sometimes you have to do it. So it's really about, sometimes we can't always do everything that everybody wants by any means, but it's about, is it really that your intention is to harm, or sometimes we are in a position where we have to do something like that and it really does harm to someone, but we try and make up for it as much as we can by helping them as much as we can, like that. Yeah, but it wasn't your intention. What's that? Yeah, that's right. And again, really thinking about our motivation, having regret for having done it, say it in a skillful, kind way so that they're, and talk to them about their other options, just do all of that stuff as skillfully as possible. Yeah. All right, everybody have a pen or pencil in hand? Okay, so instructions. Everybody ready with your implement? By the way, I will not grade these. This is just for you to keep. So don't worry, you don't get a grade on your karma. Anybody? Hang on one second. I need to explain something, but hold on. I just need to explain something before I give it out so they don't open it up. Don't want that. Okay. Just wait. Patience. Everybody have a pen? Okay. So the first thing I want you to promise, Girl Scouts honor. What is it? Keep the flap closed until I tell you you can open it. Could I get visual confirmation from everybody? You agree to that? Keep the flap. You don't have it yet, because I need you to agree to this before I give it to you. I wasn't born yesterday, or even the day before. Okay, so keep the flap closed, and then the first part you'll see two columns. One column is headed personal experience, and one is headed general environment. And then there's a list of phrases, and then there's a little checkbox next to each phrase. So what I want you to do is go down and check off, put a check mark in the box if that phrase describes your experience. And don't get too analytical about it. Use like your first instinct. Like if you read the phrase and you're like, oh, yeah, check the box. If you read the phrase and you're like, has that ever happened? Ever? Maybe it happened once when I was 5. Forget it, right? So more about your recent experience, kind of the experiences that you're having now. Now, if you read one of the phrases and you think, oh man, that happened a lot when I was younger, but it hasn't happened in a long time, you might want to put another mark there. It might be interesting to look at that. Like if that was really representative of your experience in the past, but it hasn't happened in a long time, means your karma shifted, but it might be interesting to check out what that's all about. Now, in the column that says general environment, these come directly from the Buddha's teachings on cause and effect, from the Abhidharma. And as I said before, the Buddha lived in a very agricultural environment. And so there are a lot of sort of agrarian examples, like your disappointing fruit and trees and your crops don't grow and things like that. Obviously, think more broadly. I don't know if anybody in this farm is an orchardist or a farmer, probably not. So think about things like, oh, my investments tank, or, you know, I tried to open a business and it failed. So think more broadly. I've left it in there as like the disappointing fruit and trees and all of that, but don't take it literally, take it more broadly. Think about the meaning of it. Things don't improve. Rough, difficult terrain. For us, it might be we live on a street with lots of potholes, right? It's not like we're climbing over thorn bushes necessarily, but it might be, you know, we're always having trouble on the street where we live with potholes after the winter, something like that. So think more broadly. So that's the first part. So keep the flap closed. We'll let everybody, my lovely assistant, will pass out the quizzes. And then we'll wait until everybody's finished before we do the second part. So just hang out with the, and again, really use your instinct in this. Don't get too analytical or else it'll just take forever and you'll get all wound up. Just kind of go through and just go check, 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 check. I know how you guys can be.
So we can start right now.
Yeah, go ahead and start. But just keep the flap closed until I tell you. And if you have any questions, just sing out. anybody need more time? Do you need more? Okay. Yeah.
Would any of these another general environment have to deal with obstacles? Like feeling like you have obstacles you need to overcome?
Sure, anything that you experience. Yeah, anything that you. Oh, you mean more of a mental obstacle than a physical obstacle?
Like there are obstacles, like in your life you've had certain obstacles that you've had.
This is really more about the environment. So this is really kind of more about physical. Yeah. Okay, so part 2, you're now allowed to open the flap. And column 3 are the karmic causes. So which one of the 10 non-virtues corresponds to those results? And so what I want you to do now, you can see that for each, right, there are 2 rows that correspond to killing, 2 rows that correspond to stealing, 2 rows that correspond to sexual misconduct. So you have a possibility of 4 different experiences that relate to each non-virtue. See that? There are 4 things that could potentially relate to each non-virtue. 2 rows for killing, 2 rows for stealing. What I want you to do now is kind of tally up your totals of how many out of 4 that relate to each non-virtue did you check. So for example, if you check the box that said dangers to life and short average lifespan, put a little 2 in the kind of the left-hand margin. So see what your totals are, how many out of 4 that relate to each non-virtue. Does that make sense? So each 2 rows, 4 possibilities. What are your totals? 0 out of 4, 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 4 for each non-virtue. So now we're going to look at the individual non-virtues. Les? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I'm not sure I understand what all these general environments are, like disharmony and deceit around you. I mean, we have a corrupt government.
Yeah. Well, that would
be.
I would check that box right now. That's what's happening. That's my experience anyway. Yeah.
So if you checked off, okay, under the corresponding non-virtue,
Yes.
I picked that one as line.
Yeah.
And you have checked off one in each, one personal, one general. So
That would be 2.
2 for
Yeah.
line.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I see.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
So your total from both columns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, of 4. And you might notice, what's that? It's wild, isn't it? Because now look at, mostly people have some kind of clusters, right? We don't usually have 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 all the way down. You may have some 2s, you may have some 3s, you may have some 0s, you may have some 1s. So look at the ones that scored high now. And you might want to circle in the 3rd column. Which are the ones that got your couple of 2 or 3 high scoring non-virtues? Now, is anybody surprised? Somebody said their mind was blown, and I assume that means like, wow, I had no idea that these things actually corresponded to this non-virtue. Is that?
No, I don't think so much. I think my mind is blown by how much it does.
Yeah, how much the effects. What a lot of people find is the things that scored high are the things they realize that they struggle with. Because remember, one of the results is having that habit still. So that's one of the results of karma. It's not on a separate column because it's just like, oh yeah, I lie a lot. Like I know I have that habit. So, gee, no big surprise that I have a lot of the results of that lying because I know that's an imprint that I have. So for a lot of people, and it may be that there's something you can't relate to at all. You've got karmic seeds from the past that you're still experiencing the result. But for a lot of people, it actually gives them more faith in karma because it's not surprising and it is kind of like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was a result of that non-virtue, right? So anybody have that experience of like, oh yeah, that's, yup, not surprised. Interesting, in prison, in the prisons that I teach, most of the guys are in there because of one of the first 3 non-virtues, 4 out of 4, or maybe lying or one of the 4 out of 4. Like they're just like, whoa, this karma thing. When they do the quiz, I just did the quiz with these guys last weekend in California, and they were like, whoa, this is amazing. They were really kind of sold on karma after doing the karma quiz. So now let's look. So looking at the couple of things that maybe you scored high, chances are, if you keep having that experience in your life a lot, you still have some unpurified karmic causes for that, right? It's not like you do one karma once 10 lifetimes ago and it gives you one result, right? We do have these patterns. So look now at the solutions, and this will segue us into the purification conversation. The solutions, and let's use killing as the example, avoiding doing the non-virtue, right? That's one of the ways we can deal with our karma, is avoiding, to try and like cut that habit, because we've got that bad habit of doing it. So avoiding killing, and then the opposite, protecting lives, right? And that's the antidote. So if you imagine that karmic imprint in your mind stream, there it is, that diffuses the bomb to do the opposite. Every time you protect a life, if you have a lot of killing karma, that helps to neutralize that karmic seed of killing, right? So that is one of the things we can do to purify. Remember, we've been talking about, like, what do I do with these deep pockets of negative karma that I have? Do the opposite to neutralize. And I'll give an example. I always use this example because this friend of mine was in the Israeli army, as are almost all Israelis. It's really hard to be a conscientious objector in Israel. And so he's about my age, so he's in all of these conflicts in the Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights and all this business. And he's not sure that he killed anyone because he was behind the machine gun and it's really hard to see what's happening. But he's pretty sure that he did, in the conflict situations that he was in, he's pretty sure he killed people. Now he's a very devoted Buddhist. And so he does this animal rescue thing. I mean, he's really into dogs. And what he does is he's on all of these like pit bull hotline things of like the dogs that are so vicious that they can't be adopted and the animal shelters are going to euthanize the dog. And so he's kind of made a vow to save any dog that comes on the radar. And I was at his house once and he got a phone call. And there's a lot of, dog fighting rings and all of this. And they train dogs using bait dogs that are usually puppies. Sometimes they train dogs with kittens. And so there's a pit bull puppy that had been used as a bait dog and then thrown out in a vacant lot. And she was just a mess. And she needed about $4,000 worth of vet bills to save her life. And he gets this phone call because he's on this hotline. And he just said, do the surgery, I'll pay, I'll pick her up in 4 days when she's ready to be picked up, without even hesitating, because he's made a vow as part of his purification of his killing karma. And then he tries to rehabilitate. Some of them can be adopted out, most of them can't. At last time I was at his house, he and his partner just live in a normal house with 11 big dog crates. They can only let some of them out to run around with each other, like he knows who will fight with each other. And so they have to do these whole shenanigans of who's allowed to be out at the same time. And then some are allowed to be out as long as he's in range. He's the most alpha person you've ever met in your life. And his arms are covered in scars from like breaking up dog fights. And he's doing it to, purify his killing karma very deliberately. He plays the dogs mantras and sutras before they eat, and he decides which one, like Manjushri is the Bodhisattva of wisdom, and he's like, oh, this one's kind of dumb, so he needs to hear Manjushri mantras for about 20 minutes before he gets his food. And so he turns on the tape of Lama Zopa chanting this mantra, and the dog's like, and waits for his food like, You know, he's like, well, maybe some imprints that I'll be smarter, maybe next life or something. So he does this thing. Lama Zopa went to his house with Lama Zopa's personal relic collection to bless the dogs. I mean, it was like the high point of his life when Lama Zopa came over to bless the dogs. So he's doing that to purify, protecting life. So when you look through this solutions in column 4, think creatively. We're going to look at kind of much more conventional Buddhist practices, but I think it's really cool to combine both the traditional practices with creative things that you can do to do the opposite. I had a student who had a lot of divisive speech karma. And so she decided to volunteer for this conflict resolution center to get trained in conflict resolution and volunteer as an antidote for all of her divisive speech. Another student of mine in India came to me and she'd had an abortion when she was younger. And we're trying to kind of figure out, she's like, no, I'm scared of animals. I can't rescue animals. And I'm like, okay, well, let's think of something else. It turns out she was a computer programmer. She was from Spain, a computer programmer. There was this adoption agency that needed someone to design a database for their adoption agency. And I'm like, perfect. That saves lives. Adoption agencies, save lives. People don't have abortions because they know that children can be adopted. It's like, excellent. So something like that. So think creatively about your non-virtues, and we'll do the traditional ones, but I think it's nice to think of something also very practical. We tend to be very pragmatic, so think of something you can do in addition to the traditional ones to purify your non-virtues. So questions? Yeah, Karen.
Can you think of options for the other speech?
Like what to do for the other speech ones? Well, I think, one thing is just in daily life. You don't have to take on a whole new volunteer position. We can't necessarily do that. But speak truthfully. I think for that one, for example, the opposite of lying, it's that thing I was saying before. Being brave about our ethical choices and not always being such a people pleaser that you let other people engage in non-virtue or you don't speak your truth. I think we need to be more courageous in that way, and maybe when you're around other people and they're saying something non-virtuous, say, that's making me a little bit uncomfortable. I'd really rather we change the subject. Things like that, and really kind of being brave about speaking whatever your truth is. So sometimes it's just more sort of being very, very mindful in daily life, and the more we do the opposite, we really change those habits. Right? Because it's like my thing with the divisive speech. And then if I said something negative about the person, immediately saying something nice. And it was super contrived in the very beginning. It was just so effortful and contrived. But it didn't take long before it really had an effect, even on my thinking. So I think thinking of little tricks like that, if we feel like we do have one of those habits. And for us, a lot of it is the speech ones. For my guys in prison, it was like a lot of the physical things. They actually had murdered people and raped and all of that. For a lot of us, the speech ones are sticking points for us,
The speech one is a sticking point for me. I work in retail and I'm talking to people all day long.
Yeah.
And something came up last time where the season's already upon us, and I'm straight out working really hard and trying my best and trying to help people. And there was someone who came in who didn't listen to me at all, even though I was answering his questions, and he was just talking nonstop.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
found that behavior just so got to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't really know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I was exhausted, and I did go on break, but I'm still thinking about that man and how I could have said something to myself to relax myself.
Yeah. And sometimes when we are really tired, and we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow when we look at the 12 links, some of it is like knowing when we need to take care of ourselves in a way, because we could be more prone to like a mental affliction or a negative action, and sort of taking care of ourselves before the fact. You can't always do it when you're in a workplace, but sometimes we can just go, oh wow, okay, I'm getting a little bit fed up, I need a break now. I need to kind of get my patience back to deal with these people. We can't be perfect, but sometimes it's being aware of, before the fact, how can we protect our minds when we know we're getting at that point that we're much more vulnerable to doing a non-virtue? Yeah. Any other questions about the quiz? Yeah, Jeremy and then Bob.
I've always known that I kind of lose interest in people, places, and things.
Yeah.
After a while, and I guess I was thinking that has to do with attachment to other things. Could you possibly agree?
Yeah, and that's, there's a thing that psychologists call hedonic adaptation. And we all have it, and you're not alone. And what it means is we just are programmed to get used to things, like it's new and exciting for a while, and then we lose interest really quickly, and then we're off to the next new exciting thing. And it's just basic psychology. It was actually adaptive during evolution because we had to pay attention to what was novel in our environment, because what was novel and new might have been a threat, and we needed to evaluate. So it actually was helpful, but now in 21st century North America, not as adaptive as it used to be. So I think that is just kind of the nature of how we operate. But again, from a Buddhist perspective, just going, well, my happiness really isn't going to come from the next new shiny bright thing. And reminding yourself with wisdom of like, yeah, of course I have that impulse. It's sort of hardwired to want like, what's next? But reminding yourself, it sort of doesn't work. And the new novel things sort of, I lose interest in them, and it sort of wears out, and I don't really need to pursue it. There's an interesting, I found when I was in long retreat, like one of the things that's really nice about going into long retreat is you can watch these patterns, because you can't go anywhere and get new stuff. You're like stuck in a cabin in the middle of the forest meditating all the time. So I noticed this really interesting sort of a bell curve of my desire. Like I would, be kind of cruising along. I'll do it this way because it'll be the right direction for you guys. So cruising along, and then I think, for me it was mostly a Dharma thing. Like I'd be studying a text, and then the footnote would mention some book that I thought, my grasping mind would say, oh, if I get the caretakers to order this book from Amazon, overnight delivery is best. And then if I read this text, I'll probably be enlightened by next Tuesday. Like that was how my mind went, right? So I noticed it was like a perfect bell curve. There was this slope of like, remember slope from Rise Over Run? Remember that from So the slope would get really steep as my desire sort of sped up, and I'd be like, yeah, I want it. And it was like, oh, well, the caretakers aren't coming to get the notes for what I need until next Wednesday. And it's Thursday afternoon, so I've got to wait almost a week. So I scribbled a note to the caretakers and put like gold stars. This is super important. You got to do, as the slope is going like that. And then I noticed, the next day, the slope kind of flattens out, and then it's like the bell curve, it goes. And then by the time it came to put the notes in the box for the caretakers by next Wednesday, I would read the note that was marked with exclamation points and red stars, and I'd be like, what book was that? Huh? I don't even know what that was. And our problem is, usually when the slope's like this, we jump. We don't wait to watch the slope flatten and then subside. And that's our big problem. We're always acting right at the biggest peak of the slope, and we never see, if you just wait, it will guarantee you absolutely 100% of the time So that's part of our practice, is just to go, okay, and online shopping is the worst because you do it like that. You don't even have to get in the car and go to the store. I mean, it's really bad and then the one-click thing, that's bad, right? You just click, because all of that information is set up in Amazon and you don't even have to do anything but click that button. It's bad. But if we can wait, so some people find that they have the 3-day rule and they just wait, because that's usually all it takes for it to flatten out. And then you go, God, I didn't really need that new pair of boots, that Dharma book, that whatever, the new seat, So sometimes people make kind of just kind of a rule for their own lives about that kind of stuff so that they can just watch it, because for sure, I guarantee you, and that's one of the real advantages of going into a long retreat, you can't jump when the slope is steep, and so you notice they just fizzle out.
Then maybe even weeks gone by and you still have interest.
Yeah, then it's okay. Yeah, maybe it's real. I mean, maybe you do need the new pair of shoes, or that's fine. But for, God, I don't know what percentage, I'm just going to guess, 97.5, you didn't really need it. You really didn't. And then if you still do, a week later, go for it. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob was first, and then, no, go ahead. I forgot.
The question was, is this things that we do in this life, or could be karma from past lives?
Yes, it could be from past lives. So especially if you look at the quiz and you're like, I can't relate to that at all. It's past life that maybe, your karma is exhausting and you don't have to worry about it. But because the habit of doing it is so related, often we will find that we will notice that. Yeah.
There was a related question. If you saw
Yeah.
experiences or environment that maybe, like you said earlier in your life,
Yeah.
you recognize, would that be because
The karma's finished.
the karma's finished?
Yeah. Did anybody notice something that you said, oh, wow, that used to happen a lot and it doesn't happen anymore? Yeah. Great. Another one down. Awesome. Karma's finished. And that's why it's so interesting, too, because we often drag along our memory of certain experiences that we've had that still influences the way that we live our lives now, even though that karma is completely finished. I mean, I think of things like experiences in our childhood, and of course they make a huge imprint, but we're still reacting as if it were still reality, even though it's something that hasn't even happened in 35 years or something. So looking at karma can really change our relationship to especially difficult things that happen to us as children. We kind of are still, and it's just natural that we would guard and protect and sort of have these, strong imprints that come from those experiences. But when you think about karma, you're like, wow, I'm not that person anymore. We're changing moment by moment by moment. My karma was ripening to give me that experience in the past, but I don't have those karmic seeds anymore for that experience because I haven't had it in so long. So it can really help us let go a little bit of clinging. I'm always like, why do we hang on to the garbage? That's what we're dragging around behind us. We're not thinking of all the times we were complimented and did a really good job. And for me, it's humiliation is such a big imprint for me of humiliation in childhood. And I think it has to do with rejection, which is such an evolutionary thing, because if we're rejected from our troop or tribe, it meant death. So humiliation is really related to rejection, which is just, wow, it's so big. So those are the things that make a really big imprint. But looking at it karmically, you can go, that's done. So it is interesting to look at the quiz in terms of our past experiences and go, wow, that's finished now. I'm not really experiencing that.
Is it done because you applied the anecdote,
Or it just could be that it's just finished. You had that experience, those karmic seeds. Because remember what I said, if the karmic seeds are planted, there's only two possibilities. You have the experience or you purify before having the experience, it may just be that the karma then ripened to give you that experience and then it's finished. You know, it doesn't mean that you don't still have those karmic seeds. I mean, we don't know from past lives. We have no idea really what karmas we have. But I think this is interesting because it's kind of showing us what's ripening to give us our experience kind of now, you know, and then those are the things we can start purifying. Yeah, yeah. All right. So let's, oh, yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. 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 Just like that. Yeah. 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 So it's great. So we don't always have to be expecting things to last through our lives forever, like this is just the way my life is, because you'll notice, or there might be something new that you're experiencing now, you know, recently in the last couple of years that you never experienced before. So that karma is kind of ripening right now. So it can go both ways. All right, we're going to quickly look at purification, and then we'll finish up with a practice that I know a lot of you have done, Vajrasattva practice, so we'll just do it all together. We're supposed to do it once a day anyway, so we'll just do it all together and then we'll be done. Won't that be nice? So we talk about purification with the 4 opponent powers. And some of you are familiar with this, I think, if you've studied purification. We've talked a little bit about regret. So we say that one of the ways, and by the way, all 4 of these powers need to be there for a complete purification practice, okay? Regret. So we start the practice by generating a sense of regret about the non-virtue that we've done. Now, this is not the same as guilt, and we had this conversation before. Guilt is like, oh, mea culpa, I'm a terrible person, I can't do anything right, I did this awful thing. Regret just says, okay, I did that non-virtue. You know, I said something snarky to somebody yesterday. Unless I purify that, I'm going to experience the result of that. So as my friend said, the educated or the intelligent regret of an educated Buddhist, just understanding cause and effect and understanding, I regret having done that, because that provides the motivation for the purification practice. And then reliance. And in the practice that we're going to do, in the Vajrasattva practice and a lot of the practices, we practice the power of reliance by taking refuge and generating a bodhicitta motivation. And it's said that the non-virtues we do are always against the 3 jewels or sentient beings. So when we take refuge and generate bodhicitta, in a way it's sort of making amends to the objects of our non-virtue, which is always holy beings or sentient beings. What we're really relying on, though, is what the Buddha taught about cause and effect, and that our non-virtues are purifiable. So that's the real reliance is, wow, because of what the Buddha taught about why we experience what we experience, things aren't random, it's not God testing us, it's just that we created causes. So I'm going to rely on that understanding to purify my negative karma, right? So it sort of gives us confidence in the practice. And then the remedy, and as we've seen on the sheet, doing the opposite thing is one of the remedies. So my friend, when he liberates the dogs, when he feeds them every day, he does all 4 opponent powers before he takes care of the dogs, before he goes out to rescue one. He does the regret, reliance, then he goes out and saves the dog. So whatever practice we do, if it's one of these, the opposite of our non-virtue, also if you look on the top of page 11 in your little booklet, there is a list of the more traditional remedies. So you see this little list, reciting the names of Buddhas, and we talked yesterday a little bit about the 35 Buddhas practice that we do, reciting the names of the 35 Buddhas. That's a traditional purification practice. Mantras, VS means Vajrasattva. Sorry, I should have made that more explicit. It's sort of code word. So mantras like reciting Vajrasattva's mantra, and we'll do that together in just a minute. Reciting sutras, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche often has us do that. Sutra recitation, like he'll give people a recommendation and say recite. I got once the Sangata Sutra. I think it was like 260 recitations of the Sangata Sutra as a special purification practice. And boy, that thing is opaque. I'm telling you, the Sangata Sutra is tough. It really doesn't make sense. And then I kept saying, oh, it's the translation is bad. And I got all these other translations from the Khotanese version and compared them all. And it was like, no, it's actually just really cryptic. Anyway, meditating on emptiness. We'll do that tomorrow and talk about emptiness tomorrow. And that's a huge, powerful purification because you're going right at that root ignorance that's the foundation of samsara. So meditating on emptiness just goes right to the foundation. Making offerings and making holy objects, making images, Buddha images. And sometimes we'll be given by Lama Zopa Rinpoche recommendation to make, there's these small clay images. Are there any tsatsas here? Are there any on the altar? Yeah, not these. Are there some in the library? Okay. So these little plaster, you get a mold and then plaster and make these holy images, and that's one purification practice. So these are the 6 very traditional ones. And then on top of that, really doing kind of the creative ones, right? Of doing the opposite of whatever your non-virtue was. So that's what we do for the remedy. And then the last point is refraining. So we can't say, oh, I'm a Buddhist and I've got this purification practice so I can do whatever I want and then just purify it later. Because one of the powers is making a very realistic promise not to do that non-virtue again. And it needs to be realistic. Don't say, oh, I'm never going to gossip ever again for the rest of my life, because you just lied to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I mean, let's be realistic. You can say, I will never deliberately kill a human being or an animal for the rest of my life. Something like that. You could probably say that and keep that one. But the ones that are harder to keep, it said, promise for as long as you challenge yourself, but even if you refrain for an hour, a day, a week, for the ones that are harder, better to build up an imprint of success than to say, I'll never do it again, and then you do it 2.5 hours later, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm hopeless. And AA has that, doesn't it, Chris? The one day at a time thing. And I had a friend who was in recovery, and I was working with her about her recovery, and I was like, okay, just do it in these chunks of time. Don't drink until lunchtime. And then if you've succeeded in not drinking until lunchtime, then say, I'm not going to drink until dinner time. And then if you succeed in that, say, I'm not going to do it before I go to bed. And just do that every day. And it's the same with our non-virtue. If it's about talking about people behind your back, if you have a bad habit of doing that, say, okay, I'm not going to do it till lunchtime. And then if you succeed, kind of renew your commitment. Much better than making unrealistic commitments that will then set you up to feel that you've failed. Okay, so for the refraining. So let's do it. Lovely assistant, would you like? Oh, do they have them already? Okay. So we'll do this practice together, and this is one of the traditional, and I think we had a show of hands yesterday, and many of you had done this practice before. We'll do the mantra slowly for the newbies. We'll do it all together. We'll do it slowly, and then we'll be done with our Vajrasattva practice, unless you do a lot of non-virtue between now and the time you go to bed, in which case, just do it again. Often what we do as kind of Tibetan Buddhist practitioners is we'll do this every evening before we go to bed, kind of at the end of the day, reviewing our day, reviewing the non-virtues, especially the ones that are recent that we did, or the things that are particularly heavy, or the things that we're most wishing to purify, and then we'll just do this. It's said if you do the mantra 21 times with good focus, you at least keep your karma from expanding, which is a big deal. Even to get your karma not to increase is huge. So 21 times well with a good visualization at least keeps your karma from increasing. So we'll go through. We have 3 different visualizations that we'll do, and I'll just go through that before we start. We'll do 7 mantras for each visualization, and the first visualization is said to purify mostly the bodily non-virtues. So we visualize this being Vajrasattva, and that's kind of the Buddha's power of purification manifesting in this meditational being, Vajrasattva. We visualize him at the crown of our head. And then we have nectar, white nectar coming down from his heart. We'll go through that visualization. And for the first mantra visualization, the first 7 mantras, we imagine that nectar gushing through kind of like a powerful shower, right? Cleansing us, and our non-virtues, all of our negativities, our negative karma go out through our lower orifices in the forms of like scorpions, snakes, worms, like gross things, right? So that's the first visualization. So imagine being flushed like a powerful shower. The second visualization, the nectar's coming down. We imagine it filling us up. And just like when you pour milk into a glass that's got like scummy, oily liquid on the bottom, it gets pushed up to the top. We imagine mostly our speech negativities then rising up and getting expelled out through the crown of our heads. So we get filled from below with the nectar, and then our negativities are dispelled. And then the third set of 10 recitations, we imagine that just like turning on a light in a dark room, when then the nectar enters the crown of our head, it immediately dispels the remaining obstacles, just like switching on a light in a dark room dispels the darkness. Okay, so I'll guide you through. You can meditate through until we get to this long, scary looking mantra at the bottom of the page, and then we'll recite that together slowly. There's kind of a nice rhythm. You'll get into it. Even if you're new, you'll get into the groove before very long. What I'll do, I'll ring the bell kind of at the end of each 7th mantra, then we'll just pause, and then I'll set you up for the next visualization, and we'll do a total of 21. All right, so let's sit for just a minute, get into your comfortable meditation posture with your back straight. I know it's the end of a long day and you're tired, but we'll just do this one final practice and then call it quits. So just sitting comfortably. And then just take a minute to settle with the breath, to settle your mind. And so now we'll begin with the power of reliance, and we'll recite the Refuge in Bodhicitta verse 3 times, and we can recite together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then for the power of regret, first, recall the definition of negative karma, which is any action that results in suffering, usually an action motivated by ignorance, attachment, aversion, or one of the other mental afflictions. So take a moment to reflect and think of negativities that you've committed, especially any negativities that might be habitual or particularly heavy, or a specific incident you most wish to purify. So just take a moment to reflect and think of some things. This practice works even for negativities that we don't remember that we've committed in past lives, but also powerful if we can think of some examples, habitual or especially heavy or maybe recent negativity, something that you've done today or the last couple of days. And think how, if these negativities are not purified, they'll only lead to suffering results in the future. And in this way, generate a strong sense of urgency and regret. And then visualize above the crown of your head is a beautiful 1,000-petaled white lotus. And on top of that lotus is a moon cushion lying flat. And then on top of that moon cushion is Vajrasattva, and he represents the power of purification of all enlightened beings appearing in this form of Vajrasattva. And he's seated cross-legged on the moon cushion. He's holding a vajra and bell, these tantric implements. And his body is made of white light. So he's translucent, not made of flesh and bone and organs like us, but made of this translucent light. Every aspect of the visualization is white. So at his heart, at the level of the heart chakra, inside his body is a moon cushion lying flat, and on top of that moon cushion is the 100-syllable mantra, and in the middle of the moon cushion is a syllable hum, the seed syllable of Vajrasattva. So just take a moment to imagine the real living presence of Vajrasattva, the Buddha's energy of purification manifesting in that form to enable you to purify. And the mind is so powerful. Actually, visualization practice isn't just kind of make-believe, but very, very powerful. Scientific studies have shown this to be true. So try and get a clear sense or visualization of that being at the crown of your head. And then as we recite the mantra, for the first 7 mantras, we imagine that this nectar comes down from that moon and mantra garland at Vajrasattva's heart, comes down and then through the crown of your head, and then flushes through your body like a powerful shower. And then all of your obstacles, your negativities, your negative karma, your obscurations are flushed out through your lower orifices in the form of things like snakes and scorpions and worms and so forth. So try and keep that visualization as much as possible while we're reciting the mantra, and we'll take it slowly and do the mantra 7 times. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sava Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sava Kama Sutsa Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Chitam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Chitam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Chitam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutsa Me Chitam Shriyam Kuruhung ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Safa Ahum Pe And then for the next 7 mantras, we'll imagine that the nectar fills us up from below, filling our body, pushing up the remaining negativities, especially those that relate to speech, up, out through the crowns of our heads, where they are immediately dispelled. So 7 more mantras with this visualization. Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Chittam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Chittam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Chittam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Chittam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Itam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Chittam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe Om Vajrasattva samaya manupalaya Vajrasattva denopatita dido me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anaraktu me bhava Sarva siddhi me prayatsa Sarva kama sutta me Itam shriyam kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva tata gata vajra mame mutsa vajra bhava mahasamaya sattva ahum pe And then the last set of 7 mantras as we recite, imagine the instantaneous dispelling that when the nectar enters the crown of your head, it instantaneously dispels any remaining negativities, especially the ones that relate to mind. And just like turning on a light in a dark room, the darkness is instantaneously dispelled in the same way those negativities disappear without a trace. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Suto Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anadaktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anadaktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Itam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Deno Patita Dido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anadaktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Itam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Itadido Me Bhava Sutokayo Me Bhava Supokayo Me Bhava Anaraktu Me Bhava Sarva Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sarva Kama Sutta Me Citam Shriyam Kuruhung Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajra Mame Mutsa Vajra Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahum Pe So generating faith in having been purified. From the crown of your head, Vajrasattva says, O child of the lineage, your negativities, obscurations, and broken and damaged pledges have been completely purified. So generate strong faith that they've been completely purified, just as Vajrasattva has said. power of restraint. So think, before Vajrasattva, I vow never again to commit those negative actions from which I can easily abstain, and not to commit for a day, an hour, or as long as possible those negative actions from which I find it difficult to abstain. So review the negativities that you're working on purifying and make a realistic, reasonable commitment of how long you'll be able to restrain. Vajrasattva is pleased with your pledge and melts into light and dissolves into you, and your body, speech, and mind become inseparably one with Vajrasattva's holy body, holy speech, and holy mind. And then let's think of all of the positive energy that we've generated, not just through this practice just now, but all day long. Looking at karma, like I said last night, just think about how few people spent today focusing on virtue as much as we did, on really understanding the workings of karma. It's unbelievable, really, when you think about 7.5 billion human beings, or however many there are on the planet, how many spend today really working on virtue, trying to understand these concepts and really apply them to our lives. I mean, this is really the key to turning our lives around, understanding cause and effect. So take a minute to really rejoice in all of your virtue, in your practices, the meditations, the discussion, the questions, listening attentively, all of it. And then we'll dedicate the positive energy of all of our merits today. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, you guys are awesome. It was a long day. Everybody looks totally exhausted. When you're facing in this direction, last half hour, everybody just kind of went, "Meow." It's like, okay, cut. It was a lot. It was great. You guys were awesome, paying attention, asking great questions throughout the day. So tomorrow, when you're fresh, first thing in the morning, we're going to look at like the coolest thing ever, which is the 12 links of dependent origination, which is like just the key to the universe. You know, I can really say that with no exaggeration whatsoever. And the key to getting liberated from samsara, which is even more important. I mean, it's really so awesome, this thing. And so what we'll do, we'll look at the 12 links, we'll apply our understanding of karma to the 12 links. Then we'll talk about emptiness, the other like coolest thing in the universe. And then we'll apply our understanding of emptiness to the 12 links. So what we're really going to do is apply really practically our understanding of both karma and emptiness to the 12 links to see how to get free of this mess we call samsara. So don't miss it. It's going to be cool. Tomorrow we go till 3, so we'll have another lunch again together, another potluck, and yeah, we'll just carry on like that. Any announcements from you guys?
We'll have a Tara Puja tomorrow at 4.
Okay.
So everyone's welcome to join us for puja. And then just a practical, please take your food. We can stuff whatever we can in the fridge.
Oh, we're gonna be able to put stuff in the refrigerator?
I take the baby fridge and there's some space in it.
Oh,
The
downstairs?
baby fridge.
Oh, the baby fridge, the little fridge, yeah.
There is
Yeah.
downstairs, I mean, it's
So
pretty
we're
wide.
gonna be keeping, thank you.
Yeah, so if you, I mean, we can have leftovers tomorrow, all that yummy food
Yeah.
that's left over.
We'll have the potluck tomorrow, and Mary Jane wanted to say that, we could include eggs.
Yes, you can include eggs. Take home whatever you can take home. We'll store as much as we can, and we'll start fresh tomorrow. Yeah.
And we will, we're gonna keep the cushions, but we will need some help with the water bowls and also cleaning up the potluck.
We're gonna leave the seats here.
We're gonna leave the seats, but the books can, go outside, so, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Sleep well. I know everybody's going to be in bed by like 8:15 from the looks on your faces, and that's totally okay. Oh, the Vajrasattva? Sure. Oh, the karmic quiz. You know, there's, yeah, sure. You know, I think there's a pile in the back. I mean, you can have mine, but it's a little wrinkly. I think there's a pile in the back. But yeah, sure.